morning. Oh man. Okay, yeah. So I was just working on this last night, and it was a little crazy. So bear with me. Let's see how this goes. So this is this morning. Okay. Cats playing piano. This is classic. Do you ever want to know how a rabbit takes a bath? Thank you, Tina, for inviting me here and letting me show a bunch of random GIFs to 300 people in a room for 20 minutes. So my name's Alex Chung. I'm the founder of Giphy, which you all know about, I hope, maybe. So I want to tell you a little bit about Giphy. So we serve about over 500 million people a day, about 7 billion GIFs. That ends up being a GIF for every person in the world every day, which is a little crazy. Let me tell you about the theory about Giphy. So when I was first starting Giphy, it was just like playing with GIFs at first, but then I noticed there was no search engine for verbs. Like, it's a weird thing to think about Google, but Google, you really search for nouns, but what about verbs, adjectives, and adverbs? Like, what about all the other parts of the human language? They're actually like verbs you really need to show motion in order to search for those, and the only things that really searched that you could find with motion in short chunks were GIFs. So Giphy really was this search engine around the dictionary, which is kind of funny. So it turns out, where do you use GIFs the most? Where do you use verbs the most? It's in conversation. So the theory behind Giphy really is, we found the perfect use case. When you have this index of verbs, it's really about getting into people's conversations. And the way people talk is when we start talking, we say hello. And we saw the first big use of people were greetings. Hello, goodbye. And then the second thing you say is, how are you? And so then we found the next big thing was expression. People say, oh, I'm fine, I'm hungry, I'm sad. Then after you're done with that, it's about, what'd you do last night? Where are you going? And then we saw the next big wave going into experiences of things that we're going to do. And then, so that's where we are right now, but in a conversation, that's probably like the first couple of minutes in a half-an-hour conversation. So there's this other 25 minutes of conversation that we have this roadmap for the next 1,000 years. So that is where, if we have a job past next tomorrow. The other reason why, so that's the theory behind Giphy. The other reason why I like Giphy a lot, in the very beginning we used to match or measure our impact in the number of laughs we got or the number of smiles. The internet became this like horrible place on the world, and I'd been working on it since like '93, and it kind of sucked. And so this was one project that was like, we're not hurting anyone, hopefully, except for the people that hate us, that say we're ruining all of like language and books and et cetera. But it's just a fun place to hang out and watch cat GIFs. Like, what bad could it do? So this topic is all about wonder. Yeah, it turns out that no one likes Wonder Bread. And if you're wondering what the world's largest domino human stack, I'm not sure what they were doing. If you ever wondered how to comb a monkey, if you've ever wondered what a pineapple with an umbrella looks like, or how poodles aerobicize, I'm not sure, someone made this. For me, wonder's really about 3 things. One is curiosity. Like you have to be curious about something. I wonder why, I wonder how. Then you have to have a little bit of doubt. You have to wonder, like, could I do it better? Wonder if this is going, like, this dog definitely can do this better. And then it's really about like fun and play. Like, I wonder, can I play? Is it like, you need to be able to do things. So I was doing this last night, and I was like, oh man, I'm just talking about myself for 20 minutes. Like, maybe not that cool. But I wanted to take you on a little journey of, instead of just lecturing, like the journey of my like wonder and how I got to standing here right now. So curiosity, like wondering why. Like, I don't know why. What is this about? So dirt. Did you ever wonder, like when I was a kid, I looked at dirt and I was like, why doesn't dirt burn? It's made out of trees and like nitrogen and all the things that like. So I went to 7-Eleven, got a can of gas. Back when you were 8, you could just buy gas at 7-Eleven and they would just sell it to you. Got a match, and then I lit it on fire, and then I also lit the garage on fire. My parents were not happy. So what I did next was I cleaned the house, as one does when your parents are away and you burn the house down, and you also had to call for emergency. I also, like, not speaking English in the beginning, I didn't really know how to say emergency or 911. It turns out that 911 didn't actually exist in Seattle at the time. So as the house was burning down with the one Aerostar van in all of Seattle that no one ever rode, if you're old, you know what that is. I was like, where do you find the people that take out fires? So it was in the yellow pages, so 8-year-olds, you're at yellow pages, and I'm flipping through the yellow pages looking for fire. Because there was no internet back then, and like there was no 911. So called 911, they came in, but then I found the Yellow Pages. Yellow Pages, like one of the 2 greatest books, I think, in the world. It has every job of every human that is out in the world. If you want to find your future, it's in the Yellow Pages. So I spent like days like looking through the Yellow Pages trying to figure out what my job should be. And there wasn't like a job, and then I determined that I would never have a job ever. So death, another thing I worried about, and I know a lot of you people worry about death. So when I was after that fire episode, I was like, oh man, I could have died. I didn't really think about this whole death thing. And then I saw this movie, Dawn of the Dead, and as an 8-year-old, it freaked me out. I was like, what are these dead people? They come back at you. Then I saw Nightmare on Elm Street, which is like probably why you have ratings for movies, but my parents just kind of didn't care. So I don't think they really understood what these movies were. So I'm sitting there freaked out about death. I'm like 8, hanging out. This is kind of how I felt like. I'm just second greatest book of all time, the dictionary. So if you're a kid and you're 8 and you're thinking about death and you don't have the internet because the internet's not around, and your parents don't speak English, where do you go to ask about death? The only place is the dictionary. Like, you can look it up. And so if you start looking up death, it gets crazy. The dictionary, for me, is like the best book ever written because it has every possible word and emotion and feeling that humankind has ever thought of in this like small little book. And you can just follow the history of mankind in this like a bunch of one word at a time. So dictionary got me to existentialism, which as an 8-year-old, you don't really know what existentialism means, but it kind of was like, oh, what do I do? Which kind of made sense with these guys. I thought they were existentialists. We called them wearers of black, or goths. It's the West Coast thing. And I was like, maybe I should wear black. It wasn't until like 20 years later where I was like, oh, black is just easier to wear because you don't have to actually try. So then I went to work at a senior center for 3 years. I was like, old people might probably know the secret to death. And so I'd ask these old people at the senior center, I'd be like, how are you still alive? And 100% of the people said, I never thought about it. And then I realized, oh, the people who asked that question never made it. This guy, he figured it out. And so I was like, but he was Indian, and I was like, I don't understand. Do I have to move to India? It seems like everyone else is moving to India, but then you have to wear these sarongs and like go to this thing. But then what that took me to is philosophy. I was like, oh, once you follow the dictionary, it's like philosophy. I was like, okay, I need to go get this thing in philosophy and go study this. So I ended up going to school for philosophy originally. And then I met this guy, Aristotle, and he's talked about logic. And I was like, wait, this guy invented like, here's a tree, here's not a tree. I was like, no one figured that out before, the Greeks? I was like, that just seems kind of obvious that this isn't a tree. And then he was like, if this tree isn't this tree and it's not that tree, then therefore that tree isn't this tree, which is a fancy syllogism, which I was like, okay, why did the Greeks figure this all out? So from Aristotle, it got to like Wittgenstein, which was actually the foundation of a lot of Giphy philosophy. He was like uber logic, and that's where like I stopped getting into, he pretty much said like, you got to analytic philosophy, which says words limit the way that you can understand the world. And so the vocabulary is limiting to the actual way that you can understand anything. So you need to expand the vocabulary, which if you get into the visual language of GIFs, you are now expanding vocabulary because these things are saying things that never could be said before. But Wittgenstein also was just like super logic. He was like equating logic to math. And then I was like, oh, like philosophy, you go into logic. Logic is just math. Math was created by really like Aristotle, and these were just like very basic concepts. And then I ended up taking a lot of advanced logic from philosophy, and then someone was like, oh, they just made these hardware chips that do logic. They're logic gates. And I was like, huh? And it was like, and as a microchip, or as a microchip. These weird gates, and I was like, you can actually build logic. And then it blew my mind where I was like, oh, you're building philosophy in hardware? And so that's what got me into processor design. I was like, oh, you're just building philosophy. I get it. Like, people are just building like expression about the world. And then remember these commercials from Intel when Intel was really cool and people ran around in bunny suits, which I always like freaked me out that there were a bunch of people running around with no faces, like dancing around with computers. The moral of the story is like horror movies somehow led me to getting a job at Intel. And then philosophy ended up leading me to this word, which I figured out I didn't have existential angst. It's this Torschlusspanik for all the Germans out there. It just like literally means like the gate is closing on you. So it's like the dread of all the opportunities in life closing as you get older. And like all the gates are closing. So it just like made me super, super OCD about doing as much as possible in the shortest amount of time. So VCRs. You remember these, maybe. So we had a VCR. My dad would go to the Boeing surplus and bring all this junk for me to look at and try to fix. And I was like, what is this crazy thing? Who made this? Like, this thing is so crazy. I don't understand it. So I would take it apart. And then one day he was like, brought this Commodore 64. I was like, this is like the fanciest VCR I've ever seen. This is a VIC-20. The Commodore 64 had 64K. I felt super cool in the neighborhood. Like, your computer probably has about 2 gigs, about 2 orders of magnitude more than this. And so I would play with this thing, and I was like, I don't even know what to do with this, until I found this at the Salvation Army. Tooth Invaders was the first video game I ever played, and I was like, what is this game? And I was like, I didn't realize that it was just a way for parents to trick kids into brushing their teeth. But Tooth Invaders, what it's all about is you're like a person your goal is to get rid of all the plaque on your teeth, and you win. But this got me really into programming, which then got me to the library, because the library was the only place where you could go program and find out about all that stuff. From the library, they had this weird thing called a modem, and I didn't know really what that was. And so I went and bought one, and I was like, I don't know. I plugged it in. And back then, this is like, I don't know if you guys are old school. This is the only way to get like online, which was a thing before the internet. So online, there was no Yahoo or directory. So what we did was we would have these programs that would scan all the phone lines, and it would just ring all day, all the phone lines in the city, and then it would tell you which things were online. And so this was just directly connected to the phone. I ended up randomly finding this site called Chat, which was a chat service. And I was like, oh, cool, but you had to be 18, so I said I was 19. And I was talking. And so then I ended up like meeting a girl who was 21, and I was like, I'm 14. And so that was probably the first catfish happened. And she was like, oh, no, that's cool. She was like, I'm 15. So that was like a double catfish. So she ended up being my first girlfriend, met online. She drove a Trans Am and picked me up, like, as a 14-year-old, getting picked up in a Trans Am as like a weird Asian immigrant was like the coolest thing. And so I was like, oh my God, this online thing like gets you dates and makes you super cool. So I really got into email. Side story, like when I was in school, I was like, oh, internet is really, communication is all about talking to people. One of my friends back in the Unix days, like she flooded my inbox with 50 email, and if you got 50, you couldn't get any more emails, and you had to delete. So I was like, So on April Fool's, I sent her 1 million emails. So she would have to delete forever. I didn't really think about the consequences. And the consequences were pretty bad, because the university director of security called me and said, hey, as soon as I hit go on the computer, everyone in the computer lab started saying, hey, the internet's down there, or it's down. And then the entire university was like, the internet's down. So for a week, the entire internet service was down. And the director called me and said, hey, you're the last person to log in. Do you know what happened? I was like, I send these jokes. And she's like, but they were like these "your mama's so fat" jokes. And I was like, yeah. And I sent 1 million of them to my friend. And then she got really mad, and she was like, well, don't do that again, otherwise you're out of this place. And I was like, ooh, like, your security's pretty bad. Like, really? That's when I found out the internet is like not the nicest place sometimes. So the moral of that story was like programming for me, philosophy really led to programming, which was actually just a way to lead to philosophy, which all says that all these things, and I found out computer science was like in the humanities. All these things are humanist activities. We're just taking ideas and putting them in different like hardware. They're all the same thing. So I was like, oh, it's all the same. Studying Wittgenstein is the same thing as like studying C++. So side note, Netscape I was using to go on the internet, you may notice this broken GIF link. So the Giphy logo is directly ripped off from that link. So MTV. You remember MTV? You know, the only reason I really watched MTV was watch Daria, if you remember her. She was like the best character. And then Trent is exactly what I look like in college. Totally modeling it. But when I was watching MTV, saw this thing for a Pixel Vision, and I was like, what is this thing that you do on cassette tapes? I was like, this blew my mind. And then that got me into Super 8. I was like, oh, there were people already did this in like the 40s and 30s. Like they already made these Super 8 cameras, which then got me into like Stan Brakhage, which is like one of the foundations of experimental film. And I was like, what is going on? This guy's like super crazy. I've never seen anything like this. Which then got me into an Austrian artist called Martin Arnold, who would take all of these old films and like scratch Super 8s hand by hand. And I was like, this is like, what is this? I need to do this. So then I ended up like ripping him off and making my own version. So this is a piece of work that I did and saying, can I figure out how to play in your language? Can I experiment? So I did a bunch of work like this, kind of following his style, which then led me to building, if you guys remember Final Scratch, it was the first DJ scratching system for MP3s. So I hooked that in with my computer science skills into the first VJ system that I think I'd ever seen. So we scratched it into QuickTime so I could scratch real-time videos. This is in 2000, before the mashup came out in 2006. And so I'd go around town scratching these crazy videos together. And that's what got me into my MFA program at the San Francisco Art Institute, which is super expensive still and super expensive then. And then my mom got cancer, so I dropped out because I needed to save money, moved to Seattle. And so I went to Seattle. My mom had a dry cleaning shop, and so she would do all these alterations, and she had this Juki machine, and so on the side I would have to do, like, to help her, I would like do these alterations, which I was like, this is kind of cool. And then found out there was like a fashion school down the street, so I went to fashion school because they just looked cooler than all the people in film school, because the people in film school just look kind of boring and like didn't get much sleep. Fashion kids look awesome. But then I found out sewing's really hard after a year. I still sew a little bit, but like it's really, really hard. And so I was like, maybe not fashion school, it seems. And my mom also was like, why are you working in a sweatshop? Like I came to this country so we didn't have to do that. Then my mom's a diabetic, so there was like, we would always go to the restaurant, you'd see this like pink, white, and yellow Sweet and Low packets. And I was like, what is this thing? And I noticed, I was like looking at this packet, and I was like, who made this? And that was like my first like moment of like, someone made this? I see it everywhere. Like, what a weird thing. And I was like, followed the path, and I was like, someone designed this whole thing. Who put, like, Sweet and Low, is that a song? Like, what is this whole thing about? and 0 calorie, is that musical? Like, is that, I don't know. So that ended up getting me to, long story, into Parsons to study graphic design, which I moved into Bushwick, which if you haven't seen this movie, it's kind of weird, this is a real movie. It's about an invasion by Texans into Bushwick. This is out last year. I saw it. It was kind of awesome. So I ended up taking topography with the guy that invented this. He did the typeface for this thing that you probably know, but he also did the typeface of this. This is actually at SVA, because if you went to Parsons, you know SVA is actually much better. So I ended up taking typography, and then I ended up figuring out kerning, and kerning is like really bad. Like once you see bad kerning, you see it forever. And so I'd go into Chinatown and I'd be like, oh no, like I can't really respect the world anymore. So Parsons was super expensive, but I did get this plotter printer. Like we had free access to it, so I would just print Christmas trees for Christmas and then put string lights, because it was just a much cheaper way to put Christmas trees out in the world. But what I really learned at Parsons is everything is by design. Like everything that you see man-made, someone designed it. A sugar packet, a pencil, like this computer, and it kind of blew my mind that everything that we use in every day, someone put all this effort in designing it for some way, and it was like all intelligently designed by humans. And that was like where I was like, oh, every single thing that we use can have some kind of like creative aspect to it. And that kind of went crazy. So at MTV, If you ever work there, this is the hallway to the lodge, just as a side note. I ended up putting a picture of my mom right next to J-Lo. And so if you ever walked there, the famous Asian woman up there was my mom. Marx Brothers, let me check time. Okay, cool. Come here. Marx Brothers, I'm going to go quick. Next slide. Built a Crystal radio set back in engineering. AM was the only thing you get, so it was like old-time radio. And so then I ended up like finding the Marx Brothers on this radio show, and then I was like, oh, wow. I went to Blockbuster back then, rented this movie, and I saw this thing called like, Lindy Hop. I was like, what is this thing? This is Frankie Manning ended up inventing the first like air move. This was like the first move where people lifted off their feet. That got me into ballroom dance because I saw these people at a mall doing that. I was like, what are you doing? It kind of looks the same. So I was like this 16-year-old kid at this ballroom dance place, which they thought I was weird. But then I found cool people were doing like this weird thing that I didn't know, which then I joined a modern dance group for 2 years and like was just doing Graham technique, which then got me into ballet. And then ballet was like really rough because ballerinas are like super mean and they do not like you. I don't know if it's like the tight shoes or what's going on. But what I found out is movement is really like, movement. It got me really into it. I was like, this is a whole new thing. I didn't know movement was a thing. Which then I was walking down in San Francisco. I saw this guy who was a 165-pound guy who ended up on TV of the UFC beating in this like crazy cage fighting world, beating everyone that ever existed without even throwing one punch. And I was like, what is this? And it was like this kind of beautiful kind of movement that he was doing. 20 years later, 10 years after I got my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from his brother, I teach up in the Flatiron 20 years later. And this is like and now if you watch the UFC, this is like all Jiu-Jitsu. But people don't really know Jiu-Jitsu was made by Buddhists. So it's called the gentle art. And so Buddhists ended up not wanting to hurt people. And so they came up with a way to not punch or kick or anyone, just to choke them unconscious slowly. And so that's what jiu-jitsu is really about. You just like choke people. But it was created by Buddhists as the most peaceful way to do it, which got me into boxing. Which got me into boxing because I was like, oh, this is cool. This is movement too. This is dancing. This is like, it just seems like cooler because it's called boxing. Which then got me hit a lot of times in the head. And then a few years ago, after like 5 or 6 years of boxing, I started leaking this green fluid from my brain. I didn't know what it was. And then they told me it was brain fluid. So that stopped that. But another thing that the Marx Brothers got me into was jazz, which then got me really into disco. At one point, I had the largest jazz collection in Seattle, which then got me into house music for a little bit until like I started realizing that this is like maybe not the scene. And then it got me my first pair of Jenkos, which was like totally a mistake. I'm sure like half the people here probably had one. Which then realized that humans are just verbs. Like movement is really about action and motion, and the verbs in the world, like we're trying to express them all the times with the way that we move. And there just needs to be better ways to express our movement and understanding, and hence like Giphy and all the other things that bring motion to the world. So I'm going to go quickly through this stuff. So that was just like some experimental stuff. These are some projects that I had. So this is like the second phase of doubt, where just like, maybe I could do it a little better. So fridge, this was our college fridge. It was like a little messy. And I was like, oh, there must be a digital way to do this. So in 2000, I built this website called The Fridge, which was a place to put photos and everything you put on a fridge into. This is before Friendster, before MySpace. But no one told me that you could actually make money off of this. In 2009, I ended up making another version because no one was on Facebook. Google ended up buying this, and now it became part of Google+. I made another service later that was called Text Pals. It was an anonymous way to have text message pen pals. Blew up. I had to shut it down because it was losing about like $50,000 a month from the text message bills, but it got a little crazy. I made this thing called Blockout, which is a way to the concept was how do you whisper in public? So it was a way to do, these are Unicode block characters interleaved with no space Unicode characters to create a binary code that if you copied and pasted would be a encoded way to put secret messages if you had the right encryption key. So you could go into public saying all this stuff, but unless you paid, you couldn't understand what they're doing. So IOU was a payment system that we built. It was a way to have basically figure out if you want that one friend that doesn't actually pay for their meal, just to track. Like Venmo is like this weird Venmo is this weird thing where you exchange money with each other, but the idea is like if you exchange things without money, they're way more valuable. Remember remember turntable? You ever wonder what happened with that or how that came about? So the guy who built that, we used to sit next to each other in this lab, and he was working on a barcode scanning company, and I had this underground music site that had been running for 10 years where people went into rooms and created joint playlists, and he was like, oh, cool. And then 2 months later, Turntable FM came out, and then, which is cool, he did a good job of that. Made this thing called Picard, I was trying to get Patrick Stewart to do it. This was just a way to put your face on your iPhone. And so I made my app for my mom, and all it did was call me. It was called the Me app, and I published to Apple, and they were like, you're never going to be popular enough. No. So that was that. Right now I'm working on a birthday app. It turns out there's 23,000 birthdays right now. There's 10,000 bars too, so that's 2 people per bar. So this app, what you would do is you would just download it on your birthday, and it would show everyone in the cities whose birthday it was, so you could party with them. Also made Giphy the search engine. Wedding cameras, remember these things? This seemed kind of dumb. So at Giphy, what we did was we made a disposable video camera, so you can actually get video instead of film. Polaroids, do you remember those? So we made a video Polaroid. So I'd been working on this for 15 years about how to get video moving images into a Polaroid. So this is what it looks like in the live. So these are real. This version, except they're really expensive. Joe, my friend, so this spun off into Infinite Objects, which is going to launch pretty soon. These are moving images for artists that can for all you digital artists or motion graphics artists out there, you can put motion graphics in these and sell them as your own digital work soon. Blank screens, I was like, if there's blank screens out in the world, why don't we put images on there? So ended up doing screensavers on these. These get about 1 billion views. Made a TV at GE, we'll skip that. Sad lamps. So I was looking at sad lamps, they're so ugly. They were super sad looking. So I made this the other day. Totally happy, light of the Lord. Spanish language lessons, so I was I can't read these things. I've taken so many years of language classes, don't do anything. So I made this thing called Messy. It's a facial tracked motion sensing thing that when I go into the bathroom, it gives me random 30 seconds of Spanish lessons all day. And it can track your faces and give you different types of lessons depending on who you are. Someday, I really try to get Antonio Banderas to voice it, because I think learning Spanish from Antonio Banderas would be really cool. But he costs $250,000 a day. So I made this tech for artists. One of my friends asked me, can you make me a sticker app? Because I don't know how to get stickers in. So we made this app, and then we ended up publishing it to about 50 artists for free so that they could sell their stickers online, which has made a few $100,000 for everyone. And then that kind of was one of the reasons why we launched Giphy Arts, which is our nonprofit service to kind of just promote artists in the digital artists in the world and also build tech for them. A couple things I'm thinking about right now. So this is my list of 2019. Yes, the first thing there is, it's called, I think the first thing on there is a bidet urinal. There's bidets, but why aren't there bidet urinals? So I found out that most internet services are about rich people. Seamless is about having your own cook. Uber is about having your own driver. Why aren't there entourage services? I was rich people all have entourages. You should be able to get one of those. Turns out you can. Rent a friend. Hot air balloons is one of the ways that you sell it. You want to go on hot air balloon rides? Rentafriend.com. Brush Made Co. So I ended up making the first version of this website for Best Made Co., which sells $400 access to hipster kids. And I was well, if you can't do that, can I sell $400 toothbrushes? Blockchain, how to get away with murder. Blockchain is this incredible device, way to be anonymous on the internet and do all these things cryptographically. Someone's going to figure out how to commit murder with blockchain, and then that'll probably be the end of that. Oh, these are just random ideas I was thinking about until I run out of time or Tina kicks me out. So then, you know how your iPhone gets really hot? I was okay, why don't someone just create an app to keep my hands warm during the winter time? AirPods, why aren't they Magna AirPods? Why can't these things click out and charge, and then I could have AirPods? We don't care about this. So chocolate chip cookie mug, I was oh, why can't this just be a mug that I can eat? Someone ended up making that. I was whoa, you're so smart. But did you ever think about the crouton salad bowl? Or the breadstick straw. You got to think about that one for a sec. Or lickable postage stamps that are flavored. Like, why does it taste like glue? Why can't it taste like snozberries? Why don't smoke detectors have pause buttons? Like, pause. Or that chair that you have in the closet that you put all your clothes on? Why can't we just make, instead of putting a chair and putting laundry, why can't we just make a chair that's a laundry chair that has hooks on it so we can just put our clothes on it? 5-hour energy? I don't want 5 hours of energy. I just need 1 hour. Like, can someone just make a 1-hour energy drink? Like Roombas. Like, why don't we have city Roombas? Like, if we just unleashed 1,000 of these, like, you could like put little cute like cat faces on them, and then we'd have cats cleaning up the city. Pro-choice, I feel like pro-choice is like the worst branding. Like, no one cares about your choice. Like, no one cares, like, choice, like, there's too much choice in the world. It should really be called state-mandated pregnancy, which is like way more like to the point. Also, gun control, like, that's bad. No one wants to be controlled. Like, you don't want your control of your guns. But it should be called pro-life. Like, I feel like there are very simple ways to fix some of these things. So in the end, what I found in the yellow pages, I did find one job that I did want to do, which is the postmaster. True story. The postmaster, like, if you think about the mailing system, it's the most incredible invention mankind's ever done. You can get one piece of something sent anywhere in the world in like a few days, regardless of like a nuclear explosion or anything. Like, the mail system will go on. Like, Kevin Costner proved it in like 2019, that no matter what happens, like, it's greater than the internet. This is one device that connects all of humans together. So ultimately what I got to is wonder is like a mix of curiosity, doubt, and playing, which is for me just another word for creating. Like, if you're a creator and you're creative, it's really about like thinking, what's wrong? How does this work? Can I do something better? Can I create something new? And then having fun like making it. So for me, like, all of wonder is just another euphemism for the act of creation. And then thank you to all these people for helping with the slides. Thanks a lot.